Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Isra podcast. Today we'll be discussing Islamic spirituality in the modern world. Spirituality is an interesting concept, and we see that people are struggling as we move forward with all this technology, social media, and this fast-paced world that we've found ourselves in. So some say that we live in a godless society. Some think that it's very difficult to actually achieve any sort of spirituality in this day and age. And some have very interesting ways of exercising spirituality. So today we're going to look at what does Islam say about spirituality and how do we practice that as Muslims. And we have Associate Professor Prof Ozalp here with us, and all the way from Melbourne, Associate Professor Zuleyha Keskin. Welcome.
Thank you. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Beautiful. Thank you for joining us. So let's start with the topic itself, spirituality. Dr. Mehmet, what does spirituality mean?
My understanding is that when I say spirituality, three things come to my mind. One is our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the way we can think about, contemplate and reflect on the creation with our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the mental aspect of spirituality. Then there is the practical aspect of spirituality, which is what we practice. And that has two aspects. One is what we worship aspects of Islam, and also the cleansing of the nafs, or purification of the self aspect, the things that we don't do or do to purify ourselves. And the third aspect is, which is very important, is the net effect of all of that on our spiritual well-being, the state, our spiritual state that all of that produces within us, that could make us spiritually fit or spiritually unfit.
Beautiful. All right, thank you. What do you think, Dr. Zuleyha?
It's a good question. I guess the word spirituality, when you look at the origin of the word, it actually comes from spiritus, which is a biblical word. So this is something we need to keep in mind. It's not an Islamic word per se, and spiritus means the ruh in Christianity as well. So I guess when I think about it from an Islamic perspective, I think of it as manawiya, which is the metaphysical, the meaning of things. So really that's what spirituality is. So from an Islamic perspective, spirituality or being spiritual is about how close one is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Being able to see everything and being able to live one's life with that God-conscious state of being. And that is what then, therefore, a Muslim strives to do.
Excellent. Like we're seeing that in the last census especially, there was about 31% of the people, Australian people, they said that they don't belong to an organized religion, and at least, they don't believe in a God which is, as we know, is the Abrahamic God. And we see the trend in the West as well, in Europe, in America. It's following. So it almost seems like we're going towards this godless society, right? And many people kind of say that as well. I guess, would you agree with that? And what are the implications of this trend moving forward?
I think we'd have to separate from people moving away from organized religion to people moving away from spirituality. Like they're two different things.
If you could maybe let us know.
The census results are that it's a no religion category, but the atheism is a very small percentage. They asked that as well, and that there are other research that point that people are actually looking for meaning in life. And they're also looking for something that's spiritually and also rationally fulfilling. So meaning and spiritually, it's a very important aspect of human fitra, our natural disposition. So I don't think I feel that people are by nature spiritual. It's just that they may be not spiritual enough, or they may not have the spiritual fitness that I've talking about, or unhealthy, spiritually unhealthy, which then manifests itself in different ways in their lives. And then they look for spiritual answers for that, but sometimes are lost because they feel the organized religion or religious institutions don't fulfill what they need, and they may move away from that as a result.
Yeah, those deep intrinsic questions, they don't go away, do they? Like,
That's right.
why am I here? What am I doing here? Where am I going? So I guess regardless, they're there, and those are the things that really probe that spirituality inside you. How do you see this, Dr. Zuleyha?
Yeah, with regards to whether spirituality is dying, are we becoming more godless society? I somewhat think yes and somewhat think no. I mean, when you look at the time of our Prophet, peace be upon him, he came into a society that was paganistic. So it was a godless society as well. So it's not new in a way that we have such kind of settings where there is godlessness. So it's not a new phenomena. But having said that, we have new contemporary challenges that we do face with regards to spirituality. And if we look at our society, like Dr. Mehmet said, I do feel that people want to be spiritual. It's in our fitrah, in our innate nature, that we want to be spiritual, but we're searching for it in quite different ways, through meditation, through yoga, through being physically healthy. That's often associated with spirituality. So there's a lot out there with regards to what spirituality, how spirituality looks in our society. But, how does this, how do we view this from an Islamic perspective is something else, which I'm sure we will cover. But, also though, remembering that we are living in a secular world, although people are spiritual or want to be spiritual, we don't talk about religion in society, in public space.
It's almost shunned in a way, right?
Exactly. Yeah. There's a saying, don't talk about religion and politics on the dinner table. And so, and it's very hard in public space to talk about religion. It's, as you said, it's shunned upon. You don't talk about religion. You don't talk about God. We're expected it to be a very personal thing, and we're not supposed to publicly express it within a secular society in theory, or not too much. So that secularism is at stake.
Yeah, so, well, in that case, living in a society as such, is it really, truly possible to become spiritual?
Before we go there, I'd like to just maybe, what Zuleyha said just brought some thoughts in my head. It's interesting you said you characterized the era of the Prophet ﷺ as godless. Perhaps... I also agree that we can draw parallels, but in a sense that maybe in a way that they had maybe too many gods. There was idol worshipping society, but true God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was not in society at the time. There was these false gods were in there, and they were worshipping them. They were praying to them. So they were spiritual, but it was directed in the wrong God, I guess, in those times. So in a way, spirituality never dies. That's the case in our world. When one and true God is not focused on, then people that worship nature that we have in us, they exert that to other things in our time. Maybe not in a polytheistic way, but in a different way. So in a sense, they're very similar. When we move away from connecting with one God, we connect to many gods. But I just want to also add that our society has become two ways moved away from the natural existence that we have. One is that we have been sanitized too much. Like we have created an artificial world in cities, computers, online, where we are detached from the natural world. And that really disconnects us from nature, and that's a very important aspect of spirituality, I believe. And secondly, we are disconnected from mortality. Like, thinking of death, our transience in this world, is really what draws a person to God, and to think about the spiritual side of our existence. And that's disappeared from our society. Like even in the old days, people, you would grow a lamb, in your backyard, and then
slaughter yourself.
I know it would be done in front of you, and that's a traumatic thing, but it would make you feel that there is mortality. There's something, we're dying. There's death around us, or even when people die, you go and bury them. But today we are completely sanitized from all of that. And then when we find out about how slaughtering happened, we're shocked, right? But it happens. But in abattoirs and so on. I'm not saying, we'll bring those back, but we have really created a world where it's detached from nature and that would facilitate spirituality, and hence we are not being fed spiritually as a result.
That's a good point. I remember when I went to Turkey and seeing tombstones at almost every mosque. That was like, wow. It's so in your face to see that there's tombstones. That means people have died and it's there. Whereas here, your cemeteries are somewhere that's separate and, only some will go. We've got a huge detachment from death and those who have passed away.
And Quran says, kullu nafsun dha'iqatul maut. Every soul will taste death. And our Prophet ﷺ said, remember death. That will make your pleasures, it will make you think about the other world, our spiritual side, that we don't just get sucked into physicality or our society.
Yeah. And obviously we're living somewhat isolated lives here, like going back 100 years ago, you're not in a Muslim village like our parents were, or even a city where you see many of these things. So the incidents that happen become very rare as well. Like someone passes away, a friend or a family member, and so you don't really experience that much. So with this in mind, I guess, is it possible to still be truly spiritual in the society that we live in? Maybe we'll start with you, Dr.
I do think it is. I don't think any generation is, this is my personal view, is going to be disadvantaged in this way, in that they're going to be deprived of spirituality. I think what we need to do is find avenues to connect and become spiritual. We sometimes assume that those before us, many generations were more spiritual. Yes, there were very spiritual people and we hear about them, but we can't assume that all that particular society or that particular village was spiritual. And just as we worry about the future generation before us, they worried about their future generation. So I think there's this ongoing concern that we're not spiritual enough and we're not doing enough. We're not connected with Allah enough. And I feel like that's going to be the story of human beings. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because if you get too comfortable and you think, I'm good, I'm spiritual enough, when you're in your comfort zone, you stop striving. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing.
What are some obstacles that you see, for example?
In today's time?
Today's time, that's right, yeah.
I would say, the fact that we're not exposed to nature enough, that could be one of the reasons. But we're also not as communal. It's a very individualistic society. So whereas if you're communal and you're connecting with, like-minded, we're influenced by those around us. And if you have a community that's positive, God-conscious, it's going to leave its mark on you. So I guess that's one thing. We're living in an individualistic society. The other thing is, I guess, the social media is a big thing. It's a huge distraction. Like youth are spending, based on some research, 6 to 7 hours a day on social media.
Wow.
And this prevents them from thinking, reflecting, doing tafakkur, and being exposed to basically whatever's on social media. And although there's some good things on social media, there's a lot of things that are not good as well. So I would say that that's probably one of the biggest challenges today.
So you mentioned individualism and social media. You've kind of talked about two obstacles already, Dr. Mehmet, but if you want to expand on them, or if you want to include anything else.
Okay. The biggest thing that makes a person not spiritual is ghafla, in our tradition, which kind of means forgetting about Allah, forgetting about death, afterlife, and just being bogged down in the worldly affairs. And in that respect, I agree with Zuleyha that the way our work situation, work life, individual lives, and the online world is such that it can make you get into this ghafla situation very quickly. So basically, we disconnect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Disconnection happens all the time. But I kind of compare that to, like, one of the modern problems is also in terms of physicality, let's say, being eating excessively sugar or, fatty foods or ultra processed foods, and then people become diabetic, fatty liver disease. Even the physical side, we are unhealthy. So spiritually, we are unhealthy in our time. So what do we do then in terms of physical aspect? What do we do? We have gyms, right? We have gyms. We are exercising is promoted. Where in the old days people would naturally get exercise, as in they would walk a lot, they would do physical labor. So and the nutrition that they ate was healthy or natural foods. So they didn't have to do that. But today you have to, in order to be physically healthy, you have to have a special nutrition plan and an exercise plan, right? At least something. In a similar way, if we want to be spiritual, we also need to eat for it, and we need to have a program for it, a discipline program. But it just requires, I guess, how much spiritual do we want to be? I feel like Islam does have a program as such in its natural practices, and that you don't have to reinvent the wheel as such.
Maybe we could get personal spiritual trainers. They've got those personal trainers.
Why not? Physical trainers, personal spiritual trainers.
I think so. In the past, there was Sufism. Sufism was very prevalent. But I'm not suggesting that we bring that back because, again, it's not going to meet all the time the new needs of our time. But we do have to come back to the idea that we need spiritual training and a regimen.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess let's talk a bit about from the Islamic perspective. We kind of touched on Sufism, and you said that maybe it might not meet the needs of today's society. But how does Islam look at spirituality? Like how should we conceptualize this when we look at it from an Islamic perspective?
Yeah, when you look at the whole system, Islamic system is about spirituality, and that's the beautiful thing. The ultimate goal of living as a Muslim is to get close to Allah as possible and to remove all the obstacles between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and yourself. And one of the biggest obstacles is the nafs, the ego. And for example, when you look at the 5 pillars of Islam, it's the 5 pillars, it's what holds up the religion. They're all there to help to overcome the ego or to purify the ego. And then there's a whole lot of other practices in Islam that are mentioned in the Quran, that are mentioned in the Hadith, that are all about spirituality. So the way of life promoted by Islam is about spirituality. So in a way, you could say Islam and spirituality are almost interchangeable when you use those, when you think of it from that perspective, the fact that it's a way of life. The practices like dhikr, remembrance of Allah, tafakkur, reflection, tawbah, repentance, there's so much incentive and encouragement within our religion to practice these. Ultimately, the end product will be spirituality. But I guess the key is, are we doing these? Do we need spiritual trainers to get us to do these things? So I would say that Islam is about spirituality.
Okay. So what are the aspects of Islamic spirituality, and how should we conceptualize it?
Okay. Before we get to that, I just want to say that in our tradition, Islamic tradition, sometimes spirituality is explained in a way that we're always given these perfect examples. The Prophet ﷺ obviously is the highest, and then all these saintly figures, that's amazing. They used to worship all night, and they would show, it just seems impossible for us to follow. And then therefore we think that we can never get there and we never try. I think that's a mistake. The other thing is that then when we lapse back, then we don't think about spirituality at all. That's a mistake too. So in my opinion, we need to look at it as spiritual health and spiritual fitness. So if we just do, like Islam has 3 dimensions: Iman, Islam, Ihsan, right? The faith dimension, the practical dimension, and the spiritual dimension. Without that spiritual aspect, it's becomes a two-dimensional religion. So we have to have spirituality. Islam does have, as Zuleyha said, a lot of spiritual teachings, but we just have to start with the fundamentals. That's what I think. When we look at the 5 pillars, for example, 5 pillars have to be the number one. Your daily prayers, like who prays 5 times a day these days, other than Muslims?
Yeah.
It's a lot. Like we really, if you think about it, we're spending a lot of time. A lot of meditation benefit comes with that 5 daily prayers. A lot of connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His presence. We just have to know what are the inner dimensions, spiritual aspects of salat, daily prayers are. Same with fasting. That we don't just go through the motion, but we focus on the spiritual aspects. If you don't know, I guess that's where training, coaching is involved. It has to start with that. If you go to a gym and you're a beginner, the gym instructor is not going to make you lift 200 kilos. You're going to start with very light basics. So that's what we have to do, the basics. And also Islam has some very fundamental or basic spiritual teachings like shukr or gratitude, taqwa, piety, and tawbah. And so things like this, there are not too many of those, maybe 7 to 10 of these concepts. If we understand those and master them, put them in our lives, we're already at a advanced level, maybe not the elite level. The elite level is almost like the professional. You gotta stop everything and just focus on spirituality. Yeah, exactly. Well, you gotta do that. That's what they used to do in the past. Pray 1,000 rakats a day, 10,000 dhikrs a day.
Fast.
And really control your, nutrition. Nutrition plays a big part what we eat. And go into 40 days of riyaza, this solitude, and these are possible to do in our time, but they're for the elite, and not everybody has to go that far.
Can I add to that as well? I also feel like we need to get creative. It sounds a bit sort of crazy maybe, but creative and innovative in this space as well. In the sense, I guess I think of Sayyid Nursi, 20th century scholar, and one thing he did, like he was aware of the times, and he basically is highlighting the names of Allah with everything. And he says how everything has at least reflects 20 names of Allah. So what this does is it makes you look at everything and remember Allah. So you don't even necessarily have to isolate yourself, seclude yourself and do dhikr, but you could be in that process of remembering Allah through you. And it doesn't even have to just be nature, I believe. It could be something like, and he gives examples. He says, just as a book has an author, the creation must have a creator. So just by looking at a book, just by looking at a needle, he gives the example of a needle, these kind of, man-made matters can even help us to get closer to Allah. So we just have to shift our thinking about what is it that brings us closer to Allah, what can bring us closer to Allah, and just find avenues. I also think that different people will find different avenues beneficial. Some people are thinkers, some people are more emotional, some people are writers. So what is it that's going to help me to become spiritual and connect with Allah? And that could be my focus point. So we need to empower people, obviously by staying within the parameters of the religion, empower people and encourage them to think of ways that they can get spiritual with whatever they can do.
In connection with that, I remember reading Sayyid Nursi. These students come to him and say, they complain, our teachers are not teaching us about Allah. And then he says, well, don't listen to teachers, listen to what they're teaching. And then goes and explains, how different sciences reveal certain names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then it even proves Allah's existence. And so I really like that approach, that we think that we're living in a godless society, but we could be unaware of a lot of things as well.
Yeah.
It's a bit like, the sun is always there. Sun is always there. but we never think about the sun, but it's stroking us with its light and heat. It's actually, there's a difference between the qurbiyya and aqrabiyya in getting close to Allah. Qurbiyya is more traveling, spiritual traveling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is difficult, takes a long time, but aqrabiyya is explained as being aware of Allah's presence right here and then, so.
And he says we are close to you. Then
She's
you
in
juggler.
juggler vein,
That's right.
Concept.
Yeah, if I could share an anecdote, that point about the teachers, I still remember when I was at uni once and I was attending a genetics lecture, and it's the system he's explaining, the lecturer is explaining, and you just can't help but say, subhanallah, like it's such an immaculate system within each cell of our body. And at the end of it, he says, this is why God doesn't exist. And, half the class started, because there's Christians and so forth as well, laughing. It's so interesting that what he was saying, in his point of view, and argued that God didn't exist. But to me, it meant, it proved over and over that God existed, because it was just too perfect system for it to exist on its own.
In his mind, he was saying, like, because we can explain it, you don't need God to be explained, but you're seeing more the design element, the creativity.
But see, even today, after decades, when I think about that, it makes me say subhanallah. And I guess this is where how we view things, or how we perceive it, or what meaning we give to it, can really, even a lecture where a lecturer is trying to tell me that God does not exist, if we are taking it from the particular lens, it can actually bring us closer to Allah, which means we're more spiritual.
Well, this thing brings the question, normally in class when we talk about like that, it comes up, how do we know that we are reading into, bringing into creation what we want to see, and how is it really there? And I guess that question comes up. And my answer to that is, if you can see it, then it's there. Like, if you can read it, see it clearly, it's a bit like if you bring a text that you cannot read, like let's say I cannot read Chinese, writing, and it looks to me no meaning there. But for a Chinese person or someone who understands Chinese, there is a meaning. So if you can see a clear meaning, then it's there. In a similar way, in the creation, if we see clear, evidence of design, creativity, and a presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then it's there.
So I guess finding spirituality in that knowledge can be the case as well, like as you mentioned, Dr. Zuleyha. Dr. Mehmet, I know that you've got this concept of gratitude, that something that you practice as well. And when you shared it with me, I found it quite spiritually uplifting. Like you said, you try to think of three things. Since we're talking about this, perhaps some practices within the framework of Islam, we talked about shukr, especially. You mentioned that as well. Would you like to share that perhaps with us? Like, I think that's a very profound concept.
No, I guess my thinking is this. Firstly, I'll explain my thinking. If you are doing, let's say, a weight training, or let's say cycling or something like that, if you go, there's different techniques. You can have a deadlift, right? How to do deadlift. And there's a way to do that without injuring yourself. And you can really excel in that technique. It looks simple. Everyone may do the same exercise, but someone who's advanced can get much more out of that exercise than someone who's a beginner. So in a similar way, when we look at some Islamic teachings, like shukr, gratitude, it seems simple, right? That we say Alhamdulillah when we eat. That's what people practice it as, and let's leave it at that. But when we make that as a way of life, where you develop a technique of how to be grateful on a daily basis, then a whole window opens before you and into spirituality. And that's what I sort of try to practice. And then the way I've done it is that every day I try to look for three things that are unique that I can be grateful about. And it's amazing. It's amazing that how you connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's a practice, as I was saying at the beginning. I'm practicing a teaching of Islam. And it's generating a spiritual well-being inside me. I feel good, spiritually good and healthy. So in a similar way, I think we can do the same, identify those fundamental teachings of Islam and go deeper in those. And that may be enough to be really spiritual. That we don't need these, very advanced techniques or interpretations, concepts like fanafillah, fanafil Rasul. I mean, I don't want to take those lightly, but they are at the elite level that we don't need to get there. We need to get there maybe after we excel in these things.
It's a journey after all. Yeah, that's right.
Can I also,
you perhaps.
As we're talking, I guess what's really sticking in my head is that, when we're talking about spirituality from an Islamic perspective, we said Islam prescribes what spirituality is. We have to remember that, the pillars of Islam are essential. I think the others like shukr and sabr, like gratitude, patience, tafakkur, they're all important, but we have to get the 5 pillars right. There's a reason why they're there. So I think that's a very important part of spirituality, and you can improve the quality of those through knowledge, but also through your connection with Allah. And that's where the others can help to do that. So if you do tafakkur, your quality of your prayers is going to improve. If you do repentance, the quality of your prayer is going to improve. Your fasting is going to be better, and so forth. And that's the other thing. An important part of spirituality in Islam is to abstain from sins or to seek repentance from sins. Otherwise, it's like you've got this bucket and you're filling it with water and it's got holes everywhere. That spiritual cup's not going to fill. So we can't, I guess, ignore that aspect of Islam as well, where there are clear things that we're not meant to do that are considered haram or makruh. And there's a reason for that, because it impacts our spiritual heart. It leaves a mark. Every sin leaves a mark based on a hadith on our heart, a black mark. And that will have an impact on our connection with Allah. So it's a very complex but complete system, and all of those angles need to be taken into consideration.
If I sum up then those things, I think we could sort of summarize the Islamic teachings on spirituality in 3 things. One is to work on our iman, like to have that daily tafakkur, and also relating everything to Allah, seeing Allah in our lives.
And knowledge is important there too.
Knowledge, as well. So basically strengthening our iman so that it's not a taqlid iman, it's tahqiq al-iman. So it's sort of grounded in knowledge and evidence, and it's firmly grounded. There's a conviction in the heart. That's number one. You can't have spirituality without iman. Number 2, the 5 pillars we talked about. I think we have to master those in a good quality, with its spiritual dimensions and so on. And the third one is to focus on the other, what we call the spiritual teachings of Islam that are everywhere in the Quran and everywhere in the Hadith. Like we talk gratitude, like ikhlas, sincerity of intention. Like you got to practice that every day, isn't it? It's not just in our praise or anything like that. While you study, what you work, when you give someone, help someone, what's your intention? So it's so central to our daily practice, right? Taqwa. So I think we could mention like 7 or 10 concepts that are central to. If we master those, and our iman is strong, 5 pillars are strong, and those key teachings of spiritual teachings of Islam are really solid, and we understand them and we practice them on a daily basis, what more can we do? I think that's a good formula for everyone to try.
And that's basically the hadith of Jibreel. It says, what is iman, what is Islam, and what is ihsan? So, and they build on it, like you were saying. It's first about faith, iman, the 6 tenets of faith, but obviously really understanding them. Then you've got the 5 pillars of Islam, really immersing yourself in them, and then ihsan, which is to to basically know that Allah is seeing you, even though you cannot see Him. So having that level of consciousness is really the ultimate spirituality.
Great, mashallah. We all go through a different spiritual journey. We're on different paths, and we're also at different ages as well in life. How would you see spirituality changing by age? Like, do you think it would change? It could go into, I guess it could be a different experience for someone at a different age, but then 20 years later they have a different spiritual experience or a state. What would you think, Dr. Mehmet?
I think it does change over time. Like when a young person, when you're 18 years old, 20 years old, you're not thinking about your mortality. I used to hear that a lot in the mosques, but it just flew over my head, because I'm just a young person. I'm thinking, I've got a whole life ahead of me. Yeah,
busy deadlifting.
yeah. Well, you could die any moment, right? You accept that, but I guess in terms of an expectation, you still expect a certain amount of life, and the only thing that worked for me when I was young, the hadith about the 7 categories of people who will be shaded in the shade of Allah in the afterlife, and when the Imam said a young person who tries to stay away from sins, and that said, okay, I can do that, and so I think with young people, it's more staying away from sins is the biggest challenge. Because you just
especially today, very accessible.
Exactly, you're grappling with you just found your hormones and you don't know how to deal with that, and so that's the biggest issue, focusing on that. But later in our middle ages, we get tested by other people in our lives, people in our business, and maybe with wealth, position.
Earning money and
you're at the peak of your life. So we're tested with worldly things that we may value of this world, and that may get between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of being spiritual. And towards the end of the life, it also changes. I think people think about mortality more when they're older. What's going to happen? Have I wasted my life away, or regrets? Dealing with things like that. It may be that we are hurt a lot by people, or we may be lonely. You're dealing with these kind of things later in life.
Yeah, excellent. What's your take on it, Dr. Zuleyha?
There's a lot of truth to that what you've mentioned there, Dr. Mehmet. I guess another thing, in addition to that I see is that it's the ruh doesn't age. I think our life experiences does leave its impact on our ruh, our spirit, but the nafs is really, I think, what makes us, and our ego. And sometimes you can see, I'm sure you all think of someone when I say this, a 60-year-old who's got a nafs of who you would think a 15-year-old would have, where it's all about look at me, and I'm the best, I'm this, I'm that, I've got this wealth and so forth. So I guess with age, ideally people should wisen up. Ideally they should become more mature and think about death, and probably generally they do. But having said that, I know quite a few old people who do not want to talk about death, who do not want to go to the cemetery, who don't want to go to the funeral because they don't want to face the reality of death. And that's, it's a sad thing, because you might feel like, oh, you've got one foot in the grave already. You're at that age. But people can be in denial. So I feel like it's the nafs that needs to mature. And you could have a 20-year-old who's much more mature with their nafs, as in they've purified their nafs. They've gone through that purification process, which a 60-year-old has not. So there's that element of it as well.
Interesting that I've seen people with, cancer. There've been people that I know, they passed away. May Allah treat them with mercy. One of them was extremely bitter of getting cancer and that he has to die. And the other one, interestingly, he said, well, I actually once said, the way I found out, I said to him, how are you? He said, I'm all right, but I've got cancer. I said, oh, really? I'm really sorry. He goes, don't be sorry. I'm ready to go. And he really meant it. And I was really jealous of that. How comfortable he was in saying that. I said, what makes you say that? He goes, I feel like I had a good life. You know, I got a family, and I've served. He was always serving mosques. He was, I feel I've done a lot of good things. If I've done it for the sake of Allah, I know He will reward me. And I believe in afterlife. I believe in Allah. I'm ready to go. But whereas the other person, I guess he had issues. So maybe our lives, what we do now, should prepare us for that eventual, the time that we have to face our mortality one way or the other.
That's true. Like in theory, as we age, it should humble us because our physical body is not functioning as well as it used to. Illnesses, they're all signs for us. Allah is sending us signs. You're not invincible. And so that is a challenge. I agree. For a 20-year-old, when I was 20, as you said, you think death is far, far away. Like it's just, you don't think about it. But then when someone your age passes away, it hits you. But then it's temporary.
But I also think that in our time, we've got a really big problem, or that Muslims should prepare a long old age. I'm seeing a lot of people, I guess the life expectancy is increasing, 85, 90 or something.
Yeah.
That you could start having health problems in your 50, and that can go for 30 years.
Yeah.
Right? So this idea of health span and lifespan, and that how we deal with sickness, old age is very important, and it can actually cripple us. We may think that, okay, I'm just going to be more spiritual when I get older, worship Allah more, do all the things, but we may not be able to do that because we have got serious health problems. Or in a way, honestly, I feel that we have to be healthy in order to be spiritual.
Yeah.
Physically healthy.
That's why we're going to all start cycling soon, right?
I recommend everyone to do that.
Yeah, it is. The body's an amana. It's a trust from Allah, and we have to do our best to look after it.
I mean, I'll just give you an example from my mother. She had a stroke in 2014, and since then, she hasn't been doing anything religious. She's just not capable of. But before that, she was praying 5 times a day, reading Quran every day, going to these gatherings, ladies' gatherings, going to the mosque. She was very spiritual or active and healthy, and she was happy as well. But since then, in the last 10 years, she's been really miserable.
That's true, yeah. Our mental health can also impact our spiritual state of being. So if you're having a lot of health problems, issues, it's not that easy to connect, I guess. So we have to try to do it while we're healthy, while we're young. And also those habits hopefully will stick for when we are old because we've been doing it for decades.
And it will give us resilience that we need in that old age.
Preparing for a lifelong spirituality, mashallah.
Yeah.
Okay, it's been a great discussion. Perhaps we could wrap up with one last question, inshallah. That is, let me put you on the spot. If you were to tell someone one thing that they could do or change to improve their spirituality, what would that be?
Okay, for me, it's remembering death.
Yeah.
That was mentioned before. I think that when I say remembering, it's not like you can sit and think about it, but whenever you get the chance, go to a burial, go to a funeral, go to the cemetery. Like that is when it really hits home. Seeing, and that's, they're the moments I think of that really humble me. Seeing that body being going down into the soil and the soil covering it, it teaches you so much. There are so many lessons, and the mark it leaves on you. It reminds you that one day that's going to be me. One day that tombstone is going to have my name on it. And that does wonders for the nafs. So that would be my thing. Remember death and take part in actions or activities that remind you of death.
Well, I agree with that, but I just would say that spirituality is a daily thing. It's like brushing the teeth. If you don't brush your teeth every day, twice a day, what's going to happen is we're going to have unhealthy mouth and gums. So in a similar way, we have to do something spiritual every day, even if it's little. So that's why maybe my practice of gratitude, I would say, start with that. Every day in the evening, try to remember 3 things that you're grateful for that day. It's brilliant. It makes you feel happy with your life, with your day, and we feel connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's a spiritual thing to do, so feed your spirituality.
Beautiful. Well, thank you very much for sharing those with us and sharing your insights, your experiences, your knowledge on Islamic spirituality in the modern world. I guess this is something that perhaps need many more podcasts. I was just thinking as we were talking about the levels of nafs, for example. There could be a podcast on its own. Lifelong spirituality.
We could have a series,
being probably a better focus on some of these Islamic spiritual practices. There's so much that I think we could really focus on in this area. So, but for today, I think let's call it the day, inshallah, and we're hoping to continue this conversation some other time, inshallah. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.